Good morning. Welcome to worship at Country Club Christian Church. I'm glad that you're here today. I hope you're safe and warm during Kansas City's winter storm. Today, we begin a new sermon series to launch this new year called Starting Afresh. And as we come to this table every Sunday to commune with God, we come always to start afresh. Whether you come here today with fragments of brokenness in your life, or whether you come here today brimming with joy, this is the place where we come always to start our lives afresh, to start the world afresh. And in the last few weeks, I heard a story about this starting afresh process. Back in 1968, on Christmas Eve, as folks across this land were watching television, Walter Cronkite broke in to show our whole nation what was happening for the first time as the moon was orbited by NASA astronauts. It was a stunning moment where we heard voices and video and saw images of the moon. And then just before they signed off, the astronauts said, "Wait, we have one more thing to show you." And they showed the image of our own planet Earth, an image we had never seen before, taken from outer space, looking back at our own planet. And we were mesmerized by that image. As we watched our own planet Earth move across the screen slowly, the astronauts surprised everyone. They began reading, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the earth." Everyone at the control board at NASA was shocked. Even Walter Cronkite was moved to tears as we heard these beautiful words about the beginning of creation unfolding there. And it was an invitation for all of us, even in the brokenness of that day in 1968, when the Vietnam War was still raging, to begin to see our world afresh as a place of God's peace, of God's joy, of God's new beginnings. You and I come to this table every Sunday to begin our lives afresh. And so we come this day to begin this year afresh, remembering that Jesus took a loaf of bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to his friends, saying, "Take, eat. This is my life for you." And Jesus poured out a cup and said, "This cup is the new covenant of God's love. It is for you and it is for everyone. Do this, remembering me." The gifts of God for the people of God.
Sing the mighty power of God. This morning, on this first Sunday of the new year, we're beginning a new sermon series called Starting Afresh, based on some stories from the book of Genesis. And the reading this morning is from page 1 of the Bible, Genesis 1, starting at verse 1, and I'll read through verse 5. In the beginning, when God began to create the heavens and the earth was complete chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness God called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. I think it's been 3, maybe 4 years ago, something like that. I'd gone out to get the mail, was coming back up the driveway, when I noticed these 2 young women going door to door and with literature under their arm. And I thought, okay, it's either Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. And I never actually found out, because when they got there, I sort of shut it all down. I didn't really want to be rude, but I just simply said, now before you get going, I should tell you I have a PhD in Bible and I taught seminary for 30 years. Again, I've just been accosted too many times, and so I just kind of wanted to just put that out there. And so they responded. They sort of put aside their script, and the one then surprised me with a question, a really good question. She said, well, so in all your years of study, is there one thing in reading the Bible that surprised you? And I thought, that is such a good question. And I had the answer right away. I said, oh, no question, the poetry. And they kind of looked at me, the poetry. And I said, yeah, it's unbelievable how many times in either the Hebrew or the Greek, the words rhyme, but more than just rhyme, there's rhythm there. Sometimes the endings of words have this kind of rhyming scheme. Sometimes they alliterate, all the words begin with the same letter. I said, it's really amazing, but you can't see it in English. And they said, oh, that's pretty cool. And then they were on to the next house. And I kind of wondered at the time, as they walked away, were they saying to each other, that really is cool? Or were they going, poetry in the Bible, what a nerd. I mean, I get it, and maybe it seems like nerd territory. Perhaps you're like some of the people I know who would claim to be allergic to poetry, maybe had a bad experience in high school or college when you got to that unit on English Lit and it was poetry, the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner or a Shakespearean sonnet, something like that. The poetry of the Bible is very different. It's not iambic pentameter. It's not images that you just have no clue what's going on and you feel lost. It's more like poetry is just the only way it could be told. Science and history wouldn't do it. It had to be poetry. And this story in the book of Genesis is a classic example. It's playful. It's actually playful on purpose. God says things and they pop up. God says sunshine, there it is. God says rose bushes, watch out for those thorns. If God says chihuahua, all of a sudden, here's this little dog yapping at somebody walking by, probably shaking like a leaf. And God creates leaves too. God creates them by the thousands. All of this variety over and over and over. It's a different way of telling the story. In the hands of scholars, it's not as playful, but it's interesting. I mean, for example, they point out that if you look at the verbs, sometimes God makes something and sometimes God creates something. But only God in the Bible gets to create, whereas God and humans get to make stuff. That's pretty interesting. We can partner with God in making things. But in the hands of the rabbis down through the centuries, it really gets playful. Like, I'd never heard this one before. But apparently there is this one tradition among the rabbis that when God created the world, God tried 974 times, eventually settling on this version. I have no idea where they came up with that number, but it's playful. On the first Sunday of the year, when I think about what does this story say to us, it seems to me there are 2 gifts. The first gift is chaos gives way to order. God gifts us with order in the face of chaos. And you can kind of hear it. I mean, in this version, it even says chaos. Other translations say a formless void. But it's the notion of these waters splashing around and this void, this chaos, and then God brings order. But there's more chaos going on than just that. There is a kind of chaos behind the scenes, and it's kind of hard to explain, but it has to do with when the stories of Genesis got written down. Not the setting, but when they were told. So let me give you an example, a sort of an analogy. Late last year, in 2024, I read a novel that got a lot of buzz last year, some awards. It's called James. And it's a retelling of Twain's Huckleberry Finn, except from the perspective of the runaway slave, Jim, or as he likes to be called, James. And the thing is, in the 21st century, you can write a novel that's set some years, decades, centuries earlier, because you're not only retelling something from that time, you're still saying something about racism and classism. In other words, the stories of Genesis, although set at the beginning of time, were most likely written down during the Babylonian exile, when the army of Babylon attacked Jerusalem, sacked the temple, destroyed it. That's when they decided, we're going to need some order. And they tell this story. When you and I, 3 hours into a new year, hear about domestic terror, or 3 hours into the new year, the first homicide in the Kansas City area, we need order. Or when friends call and they wish you a happy new year and they say, oh, but by the way, the cancer has come back. In moments like that, we need order. And the order in this case is poetry. Here's what I mean. The 6 days of creation, followed by the Sabbath, they're actually laid out in these 2 columns. Here's how it works. On day 1, God creates light. And on day 4, God creates the sun and the moon, corresponding. On day 2, God creates this oceans and sky. Over here on day 5, what do you get? You get fish and birds. And on day, what would it be, 3, you get land and vegetation. And over here on day 6, you get animals and people. It's this beautiful symmetry. It's elegant. It's a way of saying, even if the world is chaotic, God is bringing some sense of order. That is a great gift. The second gift is actually what's listed first. It's the gift of light out of darkness. And I love what the rabbis do here. They say, well, okay, we've heard the question. If on day 1 God creates light, what is this thing over here on day 4 with sun and the moon? I mean, what is this light? And the rabbis, they're not scientists, they're poets. They go, oh, that's easy. It's light. You know, all caps, light, goodness. What God creates first is goodness. And you don't have to have made A's in poetry to see that one, to get it. But it wouldn't hurt if you had maybe some studies in Judaism. And here's why I say that. Our siblings, our brothers and sisters in the Jewish faith, they don't tell time the same way we do. I mean, most of them do in their day-to-day, but the way the Bible tells time. It doesn't say, and there was morning and there was evening. It says there was evening and there was morning the first day. It's really hard to wrap your mind around this. In fact, I had this experience. One of the times I was in Jerusalem, it happened to be a holiday. Now, you need to understand, in Jerusalem, just like in New York or Kansas City, stores, restaurants, they open, midday, morning, whatever. They close in the evening. Everybody goes home, goes to bed. But it was a holiday. It was Shavuot. So everything was closed all day long. We're walking down what would feel like the Kansas City Plaza. There's nothing. But they said, oh, that's okay. At sundown, everything will open up. And it did at sundown because that was the beginning of a new day. And here's the point. The point is, every day, God kind of repeats creation. It starts in darkness and gives way to light. That is a beautiful gift. You know how fairy tales begin with once upon a time? This story is more like twice upon a time. In the beginning, God creates, and every day, God creates again. It's like this poet who said to the sun, every day God says to the sun, do it again, do it again. Or maybe some other poets you know, British ones, who said, here comes the sun. It's God's gift, this light out of darkness. So I know I've told you this before. There's this technical term for the stories that rabbis made up. It's called a midrash. They made up these stories to wrestle with the stories in the Bible. Like the one about 974 times of creation. Where did they get that? Well, here's one that was actually written more recently. Most of them are ancient. But in recent times, they had this rabbi, lives in New York, his name's Mark Gelman, and he made up some stories about the stories in Genesis. And I love this one. Adam, on the first day he's on the planet, he is in love with the sound of the birds, the flowers, he can smell them. But most of all, he's enchanted with the sun, this lovely ball of fire. It's long ways away, and yet he feels its warmth on his skin. He's in love with it. But late, he notices it's going down and it disappears. And he and the animals are scared. It's dark, it's cold, what's going on? And eventually they just fall asleep. Adam is awakened the next morning. It's come up on the other side of the garden, and he can feel it on the back of his neck. And he tells the animals, it's here to stay. I tell you, it's here to stay. But late in the day, they can see it. They can tell it's going back down again. So they come up with this plan. They're going to stop it. They'll pile something up on the horizon right where it goes down. That'll stop it. And so the squirrels bring nuts. Well, that doesn't add up to much. The monkeys bring bananas. That doesn't add up to much. But the elephants, they bring tree trunks, and they get it piled up just high enough. But of course, the sun disappears. And that's when God explains to Adam, you can't stop this. It's called time. Every day it will go down, but every day it will come back up. And from the sundown to the sundown, that'll be called a day. And if you have 7 of those, it'll be a week. And if you have 4 of those, it'll be a month. And if you have 12 of those, that'll be a year. Do you understand? And Adam says, sure. But he has no idea what God's talking about. He's never experienced any of it. So sure enough, Adam goes about his work, and he notices it goes up, it comes down, and et cetera. But then he realizes it's been 11 months and 3 weeks and 6 days. This is the end. It's over. And he tells the animals, I'm sorry. We did all we could. And they huddle together. They kind of take comfort in each other, and they go to sleep. And of course, it comes up again. And that's when God says, oh, and there are decades, and there are centuries, and there are millennia. And Adam gives thanks to God for the gift of time, having made enough time. I mean, it's a simple story, but it's so telling. God gifts us every day and with a new year. We should make of it what we will.